And hello, welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Green, and this is the show for those of us who believe we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. I wanted to talk to you today about Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is tomorrow. And yesterday, I went to an exhibit at Furman University about how America viewed the Holocaust and World War II. And basically, it was an overview of the outlooks that Americans had and our politicians had about what was happening with Nazism, what was happening in Europe, and as we were coming out of the pandemic. And there was a lot of history, much of which I knew, some of which I didn't know. And there were polls that were taken in 1939, 1940 of American views on immigration. Should we let more Jews immigrate from Nazi Germany? On whether we believed that things were really as bad in Nazi Germany as they turned out to have been. There was a lot of feeling of isolationism. We didn't want to get involved in the war. And I think the percentages of how much we didn't know and how much we didn't want to get involved and how much we wanted to stay isolated was surprising to me. And of course, as we know, we didn't get involved until Pearl Harbor was attacked, and Hitler had already moved into Poland, into Austria, into more of Europe, and was making a lot of progress in his efforts to exterminate populations like the Jewish population and the gay population and the disabled population. So afterwards, I was with a friend there, and we started talking about, the hate. There's so many isms now that we focus on in our society. There's racism and anti-Semitism and sexism and ageism and ableism and heterosexism and discrimination against transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. And we started to see this frightening trend happening in our country and wondering how close we might be coming to history repeating itself, and thinking about what's happening in our schools, where they're not allowing a lot of history, true history, to be taught, at least in my opinion. And so, trying to make a difference with hate. For those of you who are seeing this live, I have a pin on, says Stop Hate. I think what we can all do is speak up. When you hear something being said that is discriminatory, that is filled with hate, that is maybe uninformed, speak up, because it's going to take all of us to make a difference. And it's interesting that I would have had this kind of experience and this kind of insight going into the discussion I'm having today with my guest, Michelle Fishburne. Michelle is bold, resilient. She overcomes obstacles. She turns lemons into lemonades. And she was faced with quite a crisis when the 2020 pandemic shut us all down. She suddenly, in January, lost some of her hearing and most of her balance. During the COVID-19 spring, she lost her job as National Director of Public Relations and Partnerships for an organization that she really loved. In June, her youngest graduated from high school and headed off to college. So now Michelle was an empty nester. She was divorced, and the lease on the house that she was renting was about to expire. And what do you do? So Michelle decided to hop into her mobile home. She grabbed a camera, and with curiosity and years of storytelling experience, she set out to discover how Americans were coping with the pandemic. And what started out as a way to cope with all of this upheaval that was going on in her life, she found that she was really documenting history. And this has turned into a book that is called Who We Are Now: Stories of What Americans Lost and Found During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And what Michelle found was not hate. What she found was Americans from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different races and genders, experiencing life during a global pandemic. And I know that her insights are going to be fascinating for all of us. Again, the book is called Who We Are Now, and it's a fascinating read. But before I bring her on, there's a couple of things that I want to say. You know that I mention our sponsor, Road Scholar, quite a bit. Well, today I want to tell you something a little bit about Road Scholar that I recently learned. We know that they're the nonprofit leader in educational travel for boomers and beyond. And you know that I love to travel with Road Scholar. But did you know that they offer grants for travelers with particular needs? One such grant that Road Scholar offers is the Road Scholar Caregiver Grant. And they shared a story with me about Anne, a retired special education teacher who has been a caregiver for her 101-year-old mother for over 14 years. Her brother told her about the Road Scholar Grant, and Anne applied. And when she got accepted, she was so excited. And then she decided upon the Mackinac Island Jewel of Michigan adventure. And this trip, she chose it because it was a place that her parents had gone and spoken of lovingly. And it gave her a time to relax and refresh. And all of that was made possible by donations to Road Scholar. So I always encourage you to go to the roadscholar.org/heyboomer site, because that lets them know that you heard about it here on this show. But once you get there, if you go to Ways to Give, you can contribute to this nonprofit and help other people possibly be able to take advantage of something like this caregiver grant. So, wonderful organization. You all may have also heard that last week on the 13th was 3 years since I launched Hey Boomer. April 13th, 2020 was the first Hey Boomer show. And I have been on cloud 9 thinking about how exciting this journey has been and all that I've learned. My brain explodes sometimes with all that I've learned. But I want you all to come and celebrate with us. So tomorrow night, Tuesday night, at 6:30 Eastern time, we're doing another Boomer Banter. And the theme of this banter is going to be celebration. So I would love for you to come join us. And you can find the link to it on the heyboomer.biz homepage. You just have to scroll down a little ways. You'll find the link to the Boomer Banter and sign up and join us. We have so much fun. It's people from all over the country. We're building a community. We're learning, we're sharing, we're laughing, it's just a great experience. It's an hour, 6:30 to 7:30, the third Tuesday of every month. So come and celebrate on the Boomer Banter with us tomorrow. So let me bring Michelle on and tell you the rest of her story. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, Wendy.
Thank you for being with me today.
Well, I'm looking forward to talk. What you already talked about was so fascinating. We could have a whole discussion about hate and whether it's as prevalent in this country as it seems, or whether it's being ginned up by the media and certain entertainment groups that are trying to seek division. So, like, we could go down that whole path. But you're right; it kind of leans into when I went out in my motorhome in September 2020, planning to interview people to find out what their lives were like during the pandemic. I was very concerned that the country that I thought I knew was no longer there. I was
Mhm.
concerned that I was going to be uncomfortable, that I was going to maybe be in danger sometimes.
I
Um,
bet.
I really thought that we had changed. And as I got out there, I started from North Carolina and went out into the Appalachian Mountains, across West Virginia, up into Ohio. And as I kept going, I thought, no. And remember, this was during the 2020 election year. So there were lots of signs.
Right?
There were lots of signs in certain places. And as I asked people all the same question, and when people answered, it was just one question. Hardly anybody brought up politics. Hardly anybody brought up parodying of maybe what they heard last night on the quote news. People were just talking about their family, their loved ones, their friends, their communities, their jobs. I mean, when you ask somebody about how are you doing,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
focus on what really matters to them. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but to your point about how you opened all of this, after so many of the interviews, people would say to me when the interview is over, how are other people doing out there? Is it really as bad as it seems?
Wow,
Have
really?
yeah, have we changed? And then many of them would say, I just hate social media, and there's certain news stations, and I feel, and somebody said, they're just whipping us up against each other to make more money. And or we're being whipped up against each other to get more votes. And I've kind of likened it to the Rock'em Sock'em Robots. So since we're boomers, probably a lot of us remember the Rock'em Sock'em Robots, right? And I just feel like we're being like whipped up against each other at our country's detriment, but to the benefit of political party coffers, and media coffers, and that's not okay. It's not okay at all.
Yeah, so that's a really important insight, Michelle, because I do agree with you. It seems like the loud voices are the ones that are getting the coverage, that are getting the press, but it's really still a minority, and you had the opportunity to see that.
Yeah, yeah, it really is still a minority. And I have two young adults who are my children, and when they try to understand what the heck is going on, I keep reminding them this is a minority. And so in November 3rd, 2020, I drove into Washington, D.C., down to the White House. This is the night before the 2020 election. Okay. And when my kids found out that I was driving down, they're like, Mom, get out. It's dangerous. It's terrible. And I had lived in Washington for a decade. And I was, 3 blocks from the White House, and Gap was open, and Taylor was open, and things weren't boarded up. Now, as you got closer, things were boarded up, right? Just in case.
Right.
And that
Right.
big, big, big fence we saw all around the White House. Well, man, I'm telling you, my camera crews are very good at getting angles that send shivers down your spine, because I walked up and I'm like, well, it feels odd, but I get it. And then for Black Lives Matter, I was there too a few days after the whole, uh, protests. And there were just people there smiling and laughing. And there were so many foreign journalists who were wandering around. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they said, there's nothing happening, just a bunch of happy people out here, just, like, so I reminded my kids, the media likes to hyper focus on the bad stuff. And so I sent them a photo of a woman and her husband rolling a baby's you know, baby carriage right by the White House that afternoon. I'm like, and there's nobody on the mall except for people playing
Yeah.
soccer or running. So we have to remember that you were right. We should speak up. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we should
Mm-hmm.
speak up, but we should feel confident in speaking up, because I really think that we aren't who it appears we are based on the nightly news.
And I think, as you talk, speaking up with the idea that we all almost all, care about our families, care about our safety, care about our health, care about each other in many ways. If we can start from there
Yeah.
with, recognizing how we're similar instead of start with being defensive and the anger at how can you think that, I think we might be able to make some progress.
I think it's easier to speak up when you think you're speaking up with hope being there, with a receptive audience. And I guess what I'm just saying is I'm concurring with you saying speak up, because that audience, based on my traveling 12,000 miles all over the United States in 2021, is the if you're still hoping that the vast majority of Americans are people who really care about each other, that feeling is not misplaced.
Mm. So is that one of the things that surprised you the most as you ventured out?
It did. And I also remembered that don't judge a book by its cover. There was somebody in particular who would cut as a completely different voter than me. And I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and we had a good time talking, because I never asked people about, it's just one question. I can tell you that in a second. But later on, his best friend, who was running the local Meals on Wheels, said, I bet you, he said to me, I bet you think you know who so-and-so is voting for. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, you would be wrong. And then he told me
Wow.
why. And it was all about that he felt that he wanted a president who represented his values as a person, and that he wanted that kind of president for his daughter. And that's how he voted. And it just was not in keeping. So, sometimes even I
Right.
think, yeah.
Yeah. So what was the one question you would always ask?
The one question was this, and I stumbled on it. I got very lucky. It's January 1st, 2020. What was your 2020 supposed to be like? And what did it end up being like through to the present? And the reason why that was such a great question is, remember, I went out there in September 2020. People's eyes would sort of fly open, thinking the before times, right? And and I would say to them, there's no other question. So
Huh.
just talk as long as you want. And most people would talk between 20 and 45 minutes.
You're kidding, with no other question.
So Jim Perdue, who is the president of Perdue Farms, when I told him that I just have this one question, he said, you sure you're not going to ask follow-up or anything? I really probably think you're going to want to. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure this is going to do it. And so when he got done with his answer, he said to me, how long did I go for? And I said, 18 minutes. And he said, that is the longest answer I've given in my life.
Wow.
Because there was a
Wow.
lot to process. And, I'm not a big cocktail party person. I enjoy listening to other people's stories, but I don't like the cocktail party format where, you listen to a person a little bit, and then you add your part, and they add their part, and then you're like, okay, I got to move on to the next person. Can't hug, I just would love, I think, a party where you come up to a person, you can ask them a question, and they're just going to talk for 5 minutes. You know that you have 5 minutes just to talk to another person, and then they get 5 minutes, and you really then start to get to know them instead of this, which I think most of us don't like.
Yeah, no, I totally prefer, like we're doing right now. I love that. Yeah. So you set out, like you really didn't have an intention to write a book. You didn't even know how you were going to meet people. I mean, everybody was sheltered in place. How did that turn out?
So UNC Press made me write an author's blog. Okay. UNC Press is the publisher. And the first sentence is, I am often very naive. And I think it took a naive person to do this project, because who on earth thinks they can go out into a country where everybody's at home because of a pandemic and find strangers that are going to want to talk to you face to face, right? And so when John Steinbeck went out and did this in 1960, people were out and about smoking and drinking and doing all sorts of things and festivals. And so he was able to meet people. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't even know about Travels with Charlie when I went out. I think, in Ohio when somebody said, "Oh, you're doing a Travels with Charlie." I said, "I really don't know what you're talking about." Um,
Really?
I had
Okay.
no idea. Um, and so it took a while for me to figure out how to meet people, but I actually used Facebook because
Mm,
Facebook is sort of the new town square. And so if you want to know what's going on in a community, you figure out. So people who were saying we're doing this, or like a cornhole tournament in Henrietta, Oklahoma, that the Lions Club was hosting. Now that was
uh-huh.
a great activity for the pandemic because you were outside
Right.
and you have to stay pretty far away from each other, right?
Right.
That's how the whole thing goes. And so I saw this Facebook posting for about the cornhole tournament. I thought that's great. And then in Valdosta, Georgia, there was a gentleman who had a mobile axe throwing company, another outside activity that you really have to naturally socially distance for, or else you got trouble, right? So and then there was what was a kite festival in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming.
All right.
And that was kind of interesting because on the East Coast, we couldn't have done a kite festival in September 2020, but they could because they had vast amounts of land and their community only had like 900 people in it.
Ah. So you just kept meeting people out and then word of mouth but you did not realize you were creating a book at the time.
Oh no, 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 no. My goal was to do sort of a Humans of New York, if you're familiar with that. It's a website, and that's how it started. Was a website with photos and snippets of stories from people in New York City. And I thought, well, I'll just do Americans of the Pandemic. I'll have a website, do social media, and that because I had been trying to get a job, but nobody would hire me. And so I thought, okay, I'll do this. I'll make this project. And December 2020, I'll come back and I'll get a job and I'll say, look what I can do. Look, I can make out a whole cloth. But then as I was going, people said, wait a minute, this is history you're collecting. You're collecting oral histories. Anyway, remember I said I was naive? I hadn't even thought of them as oral histories.
Yeah. It
And
totally
and
is
and
oral
they and
history.
and they said you've got to somehow, package these for the future. And
Yeah.
so I took a financial bath by doing this, and authors don't make much money, but it's sort of my gift. It's my leave behind. When I'm no longer here, there will be people,
I
who can.
think it's going to be a book that is going to live for a long time, though, because, as our kids get older and their kids get older, to remember what was going on during the pandemic,
Yeah.
who we are now. I mean, each story is its own individual profile of how somebody was coping, and everybody had their own way of coping. I found it fascinating.
Well, so it's 100 first person stories, and my goal is to try to have everybody feel like they're sitting there shotgun with me in the motorhome and listening to these people for the first time. And it's very diverse. I made sure that made it geographically diverse, racially, ethnically, religion. There's a Buddhist monk from San Diego. There is a TikToker from Boston. There's, all sorts of people. And that makes it really interesting, and I think that you're right. I think that for a long time, people will say, well, what was it like? Because I'm the only person in America who did this. There are
Right.
different other oral
Amazing.
history projects, like Columbia University did New York City. Other universities did their own local communities. But I'm the only person in the country that got out and drove around like a crazy person during the middle of it and collected stories.
Kudos to you. So for your life, it was a time of immense uncertainty. You mean you didn't have a job, you didn't have a house, your kids were out of the home. Is uncertainty something that you've just always been comfortable with?
I've never been comfortable with uncertainty until I had to be. I was always a planner. In fact, I saw an old friend from law school. I used to be an international trade attorney. So I got out of college and went to UVA Law School. I'm like, this is my ticket. I'm done worried about money or anything for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a big time lawyer. And so Carol had been at law school with me. And so when I saw her last weekend, and she said, so what's your plan? I'm like, I don't have one. She's like, wait a minute, Michelle Fishburne without a plan? Like, hello, what has happened to you? And what happened to me was that summer of 2020 to be on August 1st without a house, a spouse, a job, or a kid to take care of at the age of 57 was there had to be radical acceptance. And then I and then when the book came out, and it's not like it's one of these sleepers, and it's really for people to slowly absorb, and then for history. Once again, I'm dealing with uncertainty because I'm thinking, okay, well, so first of all, I do have a job. So I don't want anybody out there to worry. Yeah, I got a job in September 2021. So I have a job, but I still want to create something in addition. And I don't know if I want to travel for it. So right now I'm living in my motorhome, and right now I'm at a house sitting gig through Trusted House Sitters, and sometimes Airbnbs. And so I'm still a nomad, and I think I'm going to stay one for a little bit. A lot of moms out there will understand. Like, I gave so much of I was a homeschool mom, and I was a stay-at-home mom after I was a lawyer, and I have some young adults who need a little bit of extra attention and time. And I feel like I'm just now at 60 ready to figure out what Michelle wants. And so it's really funny because I don't want to be in a brick and mortar situation and my job's remote. I don't want to be in a brick and mortar house. So because I want to figure out who Michelle is. And I haven't really dated since I got divorced in 2016, 2017. And I'm not ready for that yet either, because I think this is a time to figure out, what does Michelle want? Like, what makes you smile? What makes and so I'm leaning into the uncertainty, because if I were to try to make it certain right now, I might be missing out on seeing some different aspects of myself.
An ongoing journey to learn about ourselves. And I think we change over time, we morph, and, depending on our circumstances. But I see you as a very resilient person, Michelle. Resiliency has got to be one of your superpowers.
I think having the confidence that no matter what gets thrown at me, and actually a lot has been thrown at me, having the confidence that no matter what's been thrown at me, I can navigate it. Is the key to that. And I don't know where that confidence comes from, probably from two amazing parents who raised me to believe in myself. And what I've learned is, I think that we're all like kaleidoscopes. You and I talked about this a little bit, I think. So, with a kaleidoscope, it has a set number of colorful flecks in it, right? When it starts, and you don't add more. It's just, that's the kaleidoscope. And you see a pattern, and if you drop the kaleidoscope, and I've been dropped a couple times, the pattern is very different. So all of a sudden, yikes, okay, so what do we do with this? But that's how you start to see different versions of yourself, and sometimes you intentionally shift it, and you get to see another version of yourself, and that's pretty exciting. And I think the other thing that makes me resilient is that story of the old man in the village whose son breaks his leg. The whole I don't know, this could be good news or this could be bad news story. Are your listeners familiar with that one?
Oh no, tell it.
Okay, so I'll try to make it quick. Let's say in ancient times, there was this tiny little old man who had one son, and he lived on the outskirts of a village in a very small hut. All that they had was a horse and a plow and their crops, and they were self-sustaining. And one day the horse runs away, and the people from the village come out, and they said, "Oh, old man, this is terrible news. This is bad news. Now you won't have any crops and you will starve." He said, "Well, it could be good news or it could be bad news." And they thought, he's crazy. What's he talking about? So then the next day, the young son goes out, and he brings back the horse and a stallion. People come out and they say, "Oh, this is good. This is good news. You now have a stallion too." Could be good, could be bad. You know where this is going. And then the next day, and then the son is trying to tame the stallion, and he breaks his leg. So the people come out and they said, "Now old man, you have to admit this is bad news because you're too weak to do the plow. And he's got a broken leg. You are going to starve. And he said, I don't know. It could be good news. It could be bad news. The next day, the army comes out and it takes all able-bodied men in the village away to war that none of them will ever return from. And they don't take the young man with a broken leg. And so I keep that story close. And my kids sometimes, something will happen that's not really good. And they'll say, so, well, you know, and they're like, I know. The old man, it could be good, it could be bad. But, you know, I've seen that play out in my life, that sometimes the things I thought, oh my gosh, this is bad. I think I go back and I think, oh, I'm really glad that happened because now I'm on this other path.
It turns, right? It really, I think the attitude, you have that attitude of looking for the open door instead of just looking at the closed doors. So that's, and I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, because that, in a sense, especially with the book and all the podcasting shows that you've been doing, I mean, you are a role model for how to face adversity. Do you recognize that? Are you feeling like a role model?
You know, no, I'll tell you why. Because I've thought about this. Somebody again emailed me last night saying, you should be a motivational speaker and, you know, you're so resilient. I use the word resilient too. And I'll tell you why I don't recognize it. I think the vast majority of us that have gotten to the age of 60 or more are all just as resilient as the next one of us, are all just the people who have been innovative in the face of scarcity, who have faced really difficult times. Like nobody gets to 60 without struggles. It just doesn't happen. So I think that probably almost every boomer on the planet could get up and be a motivational speaker about resilience, because that's why we're still here, and that's why we're still putting one foot in front of the other and making the best of every day. So I appreciate that people are thinking of me that way, but I think I'm just one among us.
Well, possibly, but you're a good one among us. So this motorhome, Michelle, I had at one point thought I'm just going to sell everything and get in a motorhome and travel around the country and live wherever I live. And I chickened out. But you had some experience in travel trailers and that kind of stuff. So, like, did you have breakdowns and situations that you had to deal with while you were out there by yourself?
Well, so first of all, the experience was I bought the motorhome in 2006 when I was homeschooling my kids. And I road schooled my kids for 10 months in caravan with my parents, who were on the road for 7 full years, living in our nation's most beautiful parks and everything all over the United States and Canada. So I had role models about how to do this. And so in 2006, my kids and I, 2006, 2007, we lived in the motorhome for 10 months in caravan with my parents. And then we had so much fun that we did it again 2 years later for 4 months in Canada. And so I knew what it was like to live for an extended period in the motorhome. And I never really expected to go, which I didn't. I really never went for more than a few months. And then I would come back to North Carolina, which meant a lot of driving. But so I knew how to do that. And I was in commercial campgrounds the whole time. There was never a time when I felt unsafe. I had tire issues once, and that was resolved very quickly through a nice campground owner in Arizona who called the mayor who had the tire place. He's like, hey, there's a woman coming in and AAA's not answering her. And can you just get one of you guys out there? And the guy's like, sure. And then I came into the campground and the guy gave me his best campsite with like this beautiful, like heated fire, you know, like the gas. I mean, it was just, you know, and it happened at sunset. So it was a pretty time of day. I don't know. So nothing. So it was really a very simple thing. But, you know, I think that how each of us, as we go through life, we pick up different skills and experiences that help us. And I was just talking to my 23-year-old last night about an old game computer game called Putt Putt Goes to the Zoo. There's also a Putt Putt Goes there and Putt. So when my kid was 5 and they were doing Putt Putt, I couldn't figure it out. Like this little guy goes to different parts of the zoo, and it didn't make any sense to me. It was not linear at all.
Uh-huh.
But they figured out, like, oh, you just start clicking on stuff. So let's say they're in the part of the zoo where there are a lot of monkeys. They would just click on different things. And they'd maybe click on a banana, and then they'd see, oh, I can put the banana in my car with me. And so they did instinctively, like, maybe I'll need this later. And then there's another place where they click, click, click. There's a rope. Oh, you can put the rope in your car. Okay. They clicked on the rope gets added to the car. Maybe I'll need this later. So then when you get to another part of the zoo where the monkeys aren't supposed to be, but now this monkey is standing in front of you and you can't get into this other part of the zoo, you're like, wait a minute, I got a banana. And so you take the banana out of your car, you give it to some monkeys. So we were talking about this last night. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to mention this with Wendy tomorrow, because that's what we do as we go through life. We pick up these different skills and experiences that we don't necessarily know how they're going to be useful to us in the future. Some of them will, some of them won't, but a lot of them do. And so pick up the banana, because you never know. Like, look, Steve Jobs, he took that calligraphy class, and thank goodness we all have smartphones that looked a lot better because he did it. You just never know. And I think that's another exciting thing, is when we get into our 60s and 70s, we say, oh, why not how to do this? Because 20 years ago.
I love that. I never heard that story. Steve, who's listening, says his kids love putt putt. So I didn't know.
All right, I love putt. They're much better at me, Steve, than so if you are feeling inferior because they can do it a lot better than you can, do not.
But I like that idea about picking up skills, right? Because I did a talk the other day for Career Day at a Rotary Club with all these high school kids. And I said, whatever you study in college or in trade school or whatever, you are probably not going to be doing that 20 or 30 years from now. Guess what? When I got graduated, there was no profession called podcasting. There was no profession called transition coaching, So we take parts of ourselves and we evolve them, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you evolving into? What's going to be next for you? Do you know yet?
I have no idea. And that is I don't even have dreams. And sometimes I'll literally say, Michelle, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. I want a smorgasbord. And I think that is, so when I got married, I remember they assumed I wanted to sit down dinner in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, heck no, there's got to be a smorgasbord. You're like, there got to be stations, right? There got to be stations. And I think maybe I'm a stations kind of person. And so I don't know what I want. I'm not right now, because of a family situation, I'm not in a position to launch what I want. I'm putting what I want on hold for the next 3 months to help other people get their stuff together. I have 2 kids in movement right now. And so I'm going to help them. And my mom's recently widowed, so I'm going to help her. And then come September, I will do something different. And I don't know what it'll be, but it is nice to have the anchor to know that I have a 30-hour-a-week remote job that I enjoy, that I can do from anywhere. And like, if I had palm trees behind me right now, because everybody in our company is remote, they'll be like, wow, where are you? Okay, putting that on my list. So it's not one of these where you have to sort of hide that you're at a resort or anything. Nobody cares. So that's a very fortunate thing for me right now.
And
I do have an anchor.
Is that in law, or is that in PR, or is that
I'm doing public relations for a global pharmaceutical consulting company.
Okay. But you are, I hear, one of the things you want is to be helpful. So you're helping your kids, you're helping your mom. That's kind of part of who Michelle is. Yes. And then you were talking to me earlier about some creative things that you might explore. So you are also a writer, and PR is very creative.
Yeah, so just because your audience is gonna laugh. Okay, so this is why I don't know what I want. Part of me wants to go ahead and go to Antarctica on an artist in residency thing where you have to say in your application how you're going to share out what the scientists are doing in Antarctica with the general public. I'm like, oh, good. I can do Who We Are Now Antarctica. And so I want so I want to go do that. And then you can also live in a
Cold.
container on a container ship, and be an artist in residence on a container ship. I want to try that. I think would be cool to have that experience. Um, I would like to go to some war zones and interview people about the normal people who are living at the periphery, like in Ukraine. Like I want to interview people about climate change. I'm very, very curious.
So, my dear, you are building a kaleidoscope.
I am.
You are. I love it. Give me a couple of takeaways for the audience about how to be resilient, how to overcome adversity, how you did what you did at whatever you think is relevant right now.
I think, I think everybody already knows this instinctively, which is you never really do know if something's good or bad. And that has really gotten me through some really hard times. Another thing is when my youngest was 7, she wrote out on a little piece of like cardstock paper, with hope, love, and courage, you can do anything. And then she took a little angel pendant and scotch taped it to the lower corner of it, and it is my most prized possession. I still have it. With hope, love, and courage, you can do anything. I believe that. I just
That is
believe it
beautiful.
to my core.
Yeah, with hope, love, and courage. I love that. Thank you, Michelle. What a great conversation. I want to come ride in your motorhome with you one day.
There we go. That'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, let me tell people how they can find some of your stories and reach out to you if they have other questions. Michelle's website is whowearenow.us. There's more than 100 stories on there, and there's a way to contact Michelle there. So check that out. You can also find the book on Amazon and your bookstores, Who We Are Now. It's a really fun book. Get it for your friends, get it for yourself. I highly recommend it. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Wendy. This was really, I think each time we talk to other people and listen to their stories, we come away with new insights about ourselves. And so thank you for today. And thank you how you opened it and made me think about some things for tomorrow differently.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Let me remind you all to check out Road Scholar. So go to roadscholar.org/heyboomer. You can look at the trips there. You can also go to where you can donate so that they can help other people have some of these wonderful travel experiences. You can sign up for the Boomer Banter, which is tomorrow. Again, we're celebrating on the banter. So go to heyboomer.biz, scroll down a couple of pages, and there you'll find it. So just sign up. We would love to have you. Really and truly, it is so much fun. And next week, we have another author. His name, this has been the author month. Every person this month has been an author. So his name is Rick Blaweiss, and he is a mystery book writer. He's been a publishing executive, a newspaper and magazine columnist, a former music industry executive, and a record producer. But he was not done. At 77, his first novel was published about a detective and his trusty barbershop friends who help him solve mysteries. Rick has successfully transitioned and reinvented himself several times, and you will enjoy the conversation with him. So I like to leave you, and I've changed this belief just a little bit. I've been doing some work on creativity, and I'm changing it from live with passion to live with curiosity. So I want to say live with curiosity, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.